How are you? It's good to see everybody. Well, it's good that you're here. I can't see you though. So we'll get started. So hello and thank you again for joining me today. My name is Michelle Miro and I am the collections coordinator at the Homestead Museum in the City of Industry. A little bit about me, I have a degree in liberal arts and in history, as well as certification in preservation and minor conservation techniques. It helps that I have 13 years of experience with preserving a mixed collection at the Homestead Museum. So we have about over 40,000 objects that range from paper, photo, textiles, metals, woods. But I would say the bulk of our collection consists of paper and photo. So you've come to the right place. So my hope and goal is to empower you by sharing information that is simple yet effective to help you preserve your paper collection by addressing topics such as proper handling and glove use, housing materials that are that meet best practice standards for museums, and how to assess your collection, what are the areas for long-term storage, environmental factors that play a huge role in your object's life or your collection, common damage types and pests to look out for, and other preservation procedures that will really help in the long run. And in case you're wondering, the image that you see there is a colored postcard from about 1910. And it's a happy couple greeting you from history. And instead of a hot air balloon, it's a giant orange celebrating the agricultural king that is California. Okay, so we will get started on the next slide. So gloves and handling. So we're going to talk about the importance of proper handling to avoid damage, natural oils, pros and cons of both glove types, and when not to wear gloves. So first off, the nature of paper is organic and it is vulnerable to damage that can be avoidable just by being mindful of handling practices, glove use, and knowing when not to use gloves. So when it comes to handling, it is always best to approach every object as if it is in poor condition, as if it's not in the best of condition. So think of how you would hold a newborn baby with delicate care in both hands, right? Same rules apply with artifacts. However, of course, this depends on the object type, but nevertheless, it's a good rule of thumb to use both hands when handling your heirlooms, your paper collection. Careless handling oftentimes can result in damage such as tears, creases, and losses. And again, this is avoidable. So now, curators and other museum professionals, we use gloves to protect the object from us, from the natural oils that are always present on our hands. And of course, they provide, these oils provide, it's always good for our hands, right? For our skin to have these oils present, but it's not so good for the object. So wearing gloves provides a barrier for your protection as well. So over time, if an object is exposed to our oils on our hands, the buildup is cumulative. So it will accelerate the deterioration of your paper. So that's something to keep in mind. There are two types of gloves that are recommended, and they are cotton and nitrile, but it is now currently more favorable to wear nitrile gloves. Okay? So let's talk about the pros and the cons. So cotton gloves should be 100% cotton. The pros are washable, they're cost effective in that they're reusable for a good length of time, as long as they are in good condition with no holes and tearing. The cons is that they provide little protection against harmful chemicals that may be present on your paper. This is something that you would know if you know the extent of where the paper came from, what it's been exposed to, but usually we don't know the provenance in that depth. Nitrile gloves are not non-powdered, so they should always be non-powdered, and they should be disposable. It doesn't matter what color they are. I've seen them blue, I've seen them purple, so that shouldn't really matter. But so nitrile basically is composed of a synthetic rubber. And so the pro is that they're safe to use on a variety of objects. They provide more protection for us, the wearer, and they don't contain latex, which helps those with an allergy. They, again, are preferred over cotton. They provide a stronger barrier to protect us. The con is that they are not as reusable as cotton. Maybe one or two uses are good, but you have to be very careful with cross-contamination if there's issues on your paper, such as mold or other damage types. So keep in mind that the use of both gloves results in the loss of feeling or dexterity. So this can lead to also unintentional mishandling. If your paper object is embrittled, it's flaking, or is in a generally poor condition, it's best to handle with clean, bare hands, so long as there are no risks to you. Okay. And yes, those are my hands. So where to begin? I know this is, it can be daunting. So I'm hoping that these steps will guide you through. Okay, so it's always good to start with a thorough inspection of what you have, what your collection consists of, to help you know exactly what you need in terms of housing materials, the condition of your objects. This will also help you to avoid overspending and second guessing that might result in further delays. So first off, avoid food and beverage. This will not only stain your object if there is an accident, but it can also attract pests. Sometimes we have seen that damage on an object can result in stains, of course, but then we see even an older stain is attractive to pests, and that's the area where they will focus their feeding on at times. So choosing a workspace, choose a sturdy table, such as a dining room table, a desk, or another flat surface that can accommodate your paper in terms of its size. To provide further protection of your paper, you can also use a clean cotton sheet over your surface before you place your paper or objects on it. And then removing materials that are not important to your paper. Now, this is important, so keep in mind to, if you see anything like paper clips, rubber bands, to remove them. You can use bags to store them. You don't really need to use any proper housing materials to store old paper clips and rubber bands if you choose to do so. That depends on the history of your object, what you're dealing with. So it all depends. Also, attempt to gently unfold and flatten paper that is in good condition only. So good condition means that there are no tears present. It's not flaking. Again, flaking is a sign of severe embrittlement, and we'll talk more about what all that means in terms of damage. So let's say we are in the best case scenario and your rolled up map that you inherited is in sturdy condition, it's flexible. So then you can unroll it and use weights to weigh it down. And we'll talk more about that also later on during the course of the workshop. And clean paper. Cleaning paper, I don't mean to use any liquids. So cleaning paper involves the use of a brush, which will also be discussed later, and I will talk about techniques to use. Now, remove newspapers from collection and store separately. Why is that? Well, first of all, And most importantly, newspapers are one of the most acidic papers that we know of. So why is that? Papers, if you think about it, need to be mass produced. So the paper quality is not that great. And even further, what that means is the wood pulp present naturally in all paper remains. So that wood pulp is highly acidic, and thus the reason why newspapers tend to become very brittle and they discolor to the point of complete browning or even a darker color. So they need to be housed separately because there is such a thing as cross contamination rather, of acids from one paper to another. So, and it can lead to more problems. So it's always just best to separate the newspapers from anything else if you have newspapers in your collection. And set aside paper that is highly damaged. So highly damaged means it's really faded, there are tears, it's brittle to the point where it's flaking. Anything that you note that could pose an issue in the long run, I suggest you separate those so you can closely monitor those as well. And also, because of their poor condition, they may need extra support. So they may need a little bit more help by using a board or other envelopes, which we'll talk about as well. Okay, and divide papers according to the size and approximate weight. So this is also very important in preservation, and we'll talk about that. You have to be aware of what's bulky and what is oversized. This can pose an issue for other objects in your collection if they're stored together. Usually the rule of thumb is when you're housing an object, say like in a box, paper object, you would want the most bulky to go on the bottom of the box. So it's first one in the box, and then your lighter papers go on top. If it's reversed, that weight can do damage to the other more fragile papers on the bottom of your box. So that's something to keep in mind. And then also it's easier just to know ahead of time the size of your objects. So that way you know exactly the dimensions of the envelopes that you may need, the folders that you may need, and boxes. So it's extremely important also. Inadequate measurements can lead to issues like abrasion damage if you don't have the proper housing materials that fit that size of that particular paper. And determine how your collection will be used and your available storage areas. So this is also vital because if you have a collection that you know you are going to share constantly, and they are, say, letter-sized documents or they're postcards, you might want to invest, instead of a folder and a box, you may want to invest in an album. So albums that can adhere to best practices, and we'll talk about that, because albums, of course, give you that option to show your particular ephemera or paper collection instead of just having them in a box. So try to determine how you will use your collection. And then also think of what's available to you, your storage areas. And I'll talk more about what you can do to store your objects at home if you don't have a storage facility like most museums do. Now, before you attempt to purchase some housing materials like boxes and folders, it's really, really important to know the terminology and what it means, okay? So First off, issue with the term archival quality. Now, I don't want any of you to automatically throw away anything that you may have purchased that are labeled archival quality. It could still work, and now I will teach you how that is later on. But my issue with the term archival quality is that it's a non-specific describer. It does not thoroughly describe how suitable that housing product is, whether it's a folder or whether it's a plastic sheeting. It's not a suitable indicator of what it will do in the long run. It's for long-term storage. So another term to know is also ephemera. So I just used that word not too long ago. So ephemera is just like an umbrella term which describes a lot of printed materials. So ephemera basically means anything paper-based. So let's look at the keywords that you would want to be mindful of. So buffered versus non-buffered. So, okay, buffered means there is something added to the housing materials that is known as an alkaline reserve. So this is typically in the form of calcium or magnesium carbonate with 2 to 3% range. So it helps to stop the transfers of acid from one paper to the next. Typically, the majority of a paper collection is best housed in buffered enclosures. However, paper objects such as blueprints and other albums, paper with wool or silk components, or anything that contains any forms of animal protein, they are best stored in non-buffered material. Okay. So non-buffered means just that. There are no alkaline additives in its composition. So when in doubt, you can use non-buffered. But for the majority of paper collections, it is suitable to use buffered enclosures. Now, linen-free basically means it's a natural component. Linen is a natural component of the cell walls of plants and trees. So despite its organic nature, if it is not removed in the making of housing materials, it can react to light and heat in any given environment, and it creates a very highly acidic environment, which then leads to discoloration of paper. So you would want something that says linen-free. Acid-free, okay. Here's where it can get a little misleading. Acid-free is not completely free of acid. So let me explain. It means that the amount of acidity is so low that it becomes neutral, which is exactly what we need in housing materials for ephemera. So looking at this scale here, so the level we want to see in our enclosures for paper objects is 7.0 and higher. Are you still with me? Anything lower than that is highly acidic. So it's the opposite of what we intuitively think of with numbers. So the good news is we do not have to memorize this scale. There is a very quick and simple way to figure out if your housing material, paper housing material, is acidic and what level it's at. So we can make the best decisions after being well informed. And it is by a flick of a wrist, literally. So testing acidity levels, what you see on the left of the screen is a pH testing pen. This one is in particular is from Light Impressions, but you can actually purchase a pH pen online in various different stores like University Products, Gaylord Archival, Hollinger Metal Edge, which will all be on a screen that I'll talk about where you can find more resources. So The pen is less than $10, and I think I've even found it on Amazon as well. So you can type in just pH testing pen, and it really doesn't matter the brand. As long as it's a pH testing pen to test on paper, you should be fine. But to be clear, you don't need this pen if you bought housing materials that are stated to be acid-free, linen-free. So keep in mind, this is intended for paper-based housing materials. However, it is useful if you have materials that are only categorized as archival quality or archival friendly, which in that case, it justifies the purchase of the pen. Okay, now it goes without saying, but I'm gonna say it anyway. This pen is only to be used on paper housing materials, so please do not mark your paper objects. The way it works, and from my limited understanding of the technical scientific side, is that it is composed of a chemical ink called bromocresol, which interacts with the acid present in the paper enclosure. So once you swipe a section of the paper enclosure, it'll tell you the level by showing up as different colors. So yellow is for high acid content, and green is for moderate acid content, and blue is neutral, meaning it's acid-free, but remember, it's not completely acid-free, but it's at the levels that we would want for long-term storage of your paper objects, and it won't harm your collection. Housing materials. So let's talk about boxes, folders, paper enclosures, interleaving tissue, mat board, albums, scrapbooks, polyester envelopes, and other safe products, and the materials to avoid. So first off, boxes come in a variety of sizes. The one shown in the image is an 11 by 15 and is most suitable for magazines and larger pamphlets. The box types range from upright storage with top flap lids, drop fronts, which is the one in the picture as well, and I'll kind of show you a visual example of that. An open pamphlet box, it's good to store for other paper products, not just pamphlets, that are smaller than 11 by 15. And there are also boxes that are shallow and wider and much larger for newspapers and periodical storage. Okay, now folders. Folders come in a variety of sizes, and they can come in very large quantities and very large sizing for your own custom fitting. They also come in different thicknesses. I would say on the thicker range would be most suitable for objects that are only going to be stored in a folder, and if they need that additional support because their condition is really not that great. Okay. And they are all also acid-free. So remember, it all has to be acid-free, linen-free, buffered, unless they are a different type of paper, which we can, you can talk to me more about via email if you have more questions about your specific collection. Okay, so paper should be stored flat, but if not, rolled storage is possible only if the paper is in good condition. So there's no tearing, no embrittlement, no flaking. So you would, so if you have like a roll, a map, you would want to wrap the paper over an acid-free tube, and then wrap a polyester sheeting over it with acid-free paper, and then secure the roll using an unbleached cotton tie called cotton twill. It's called cotton twill tape, but it's not an adhesive. Then this can be stored in a narrow box too. So okay. Now, interleaving tissue. Interleaving tissue can be buffered or non-buffered as well. If, again, you're not too sure, you can always go with non-buffered. tissue. And this is really great to use when you are limited in resources in terms of what you can buy. So if, say, you can only afford to buy a certain set of folders and you have to put maybe 5 to 10 pieces of paper in a folder for storage, to prevent the acid from migrating from one paper to the next, you can use interleaving tissues in between, and that should help in the short term. Now, mat boards are really great for housing materials and objects that need that additional support. So this can be paper that is highly brittle, there are tears, so that just provides an added support within a folder or within an envelope. So there are albums and scrapbooks. So albums should be acid-free in terms of their paper backing. There should not be any adhesive to it. That's not what we want at all. And the plastic over it, which provides the clear view of your paper, should be of a good quality particular plastic. And that goes for scrapbooks as well. So let's talk about the specific plastics that would be good for storage. So currently, there are 3 types of safe plastics to use for long-term storage. They are, the first one being polyester, and the brand name is Melanex. It used to be called Mylar. In fact, I know Mylar has been discontinued. They no longer sell it. So Melanex is basically polyester. And polyester plastic is the sturdiest of them all. They provide a clear visibility of the content, and it gives good support. So it's a little thicker. So the other plastic is polypropylene. Now, polypropylene costs less than polyester, is a little bit less rigid, but it's still clear for visibility. And polyethylene is the most soft of all plastics. It is less clear because of all of these reasons, because it's softer, it's less clear, it's the most affordable. So again, you would want, polyester would be the best, but if you can't afford it, polyethylene will be your next bet. Okay, now materials to avoid. Avoid using rubber bands, magnetic albums, which have no magnets in them, but they are the albums that have those ridges on the back, and they have an adhesive, so they stick to the backing of a photo or a document. So these were highly popular during the 70s and 80s. So I would advise you to stay clear from those particular albums. The adhesive discolors and stains your paper, and it could add to the acid levels, which is a whole other issue that can lead to discoloration and eventual weakening of the paper fibers over time. So stay clear of those magnetic albums. Avoid paper clips, staples, adhesives, also polyvinyl chloride or PVC plastics when storing paper. So just try to avoid purchasing plastics from like Target or from the 99-cent store. They're great for, I guess, home use and for other things, but not for long-term preservation whatsoever. These plastics are not good because they're not stable. So what does that mean? They off-gas, so they emit a type of gas in its environment that will break down and is harmful to the life of your object. Okay.
Michelle, can I ask you to repeat something you said earlier? A viewer would like some clarification. You said you could roll a map over a blank tube and then a blank around it.
No, I'm sorry. So you can roll a paper that is in good condition, so it's flexible, so it does not have any tearing, it's not embrittled. You would want an acid-free tube, and the tube should be wide enough to accommodate the width of your paper. And so what you would want to do is roll your paper with that acid-free tube, and then, or you can line it first with acid-free interleaving tissue. It comes in different sizes over the tube, and then you roll gently your paper, and then you can cover that with polyester sheeting, because the polyester sheeting comes not just in small letter sizes, but they also come in sheets that are in rolls that you can use to cover the entire tube. And then you would use cotton ties to tie and secure it in place. And then I would, if you can't afford a rolled tube box to put in, the tube to put in a box, I would just use like a cotton sheet and to secure it and store it somewhere that is above floor level and away from a direct sunlight. I hope that answered your question. Okay. Now oh, I'm sorry. Let's go back. I forgot to show you the examples that I brought down from our work areas of the different boxes that we use, so that way you can kind of gauge what you need. Okay, so this one is a open pamphlet box, and it's white inside. So this is acid-free again, acid-free, linen-free, and buffered. Perfect for a certain amount. I would say maybe about 5 to 10 pamphlets or smaller size papers, depending on the width too. So you can get maybe even 10 to 15, depending on the bulk of the paper. If it's a bit bulkier, maybe you can have less than that, maybe half of that. And these we purchase through Hollinger Metal Edge. Hollinger Metal Edge has an actual store in Commerce, the city of Commerce, Los Angeles, where you can go to, though I'm not sure if they're open right now currently because of COVID-19, but they're also available online, and their catalog is available online, and they have a plethora of options. So they're really great for storage box materials that are museum quality, not just archival friendly. So the top flap lids look like this. See, there's only a certain amount of room you have, so you have to gauge. Again, that's why it's so important to assess your collection before you go ahead and buy your materials, as they can be a bit costly, and you want to avoid overspending as well and making a mistake. So these are good for objects, paper objects that are in good condition, because they are stored vertically. So that's the rule of thumb. If you see that your collection is in poor condition, it's brittled and it has tearing, there's structural issues with it, I would not store them vertically. If it's in poor condition, I would store them flat. But if they're flexible, they're sturdy, then vertical is the way to go. Again, that also depends on the size of your particular paper collection. And this is the pamphlet box filled with actual objects in them, paper objects. Okay. So you see, and it's easily accessible too. Now here's a box. It's 11 by 15. This has actual objects in there, so I'm going to be very careful, and I'm going to try to show you what we have here. So this is again an acid-free, linen-free, buffered box. So the lid comes off really easy. Okay. And I'm going to show you what the drop front looks like. So these are mostly all magazines from the 1920s. So the lid comes down, so you can easily access the magazine. So there's 2 layers of protection here. So these magazines are stored obviously in this box, but then also they are in acid-free envelopes, okay, which also come in a variety of different sizes. This is a small example of Blue Board. This also comes in different thicknesses depending on your need, but this one is most suitable for displays to provide support of your paper, or for long-term housing if your paper again needs that extra support. Okay. That's what it looks like. Okay. This is from Light Impressions, and this is interleaving tissue that can be used for both photos as well as paper. And this one is called Apollo tissue. So again, it's acid-free, linen-free, buffered, but it's cut to shape, so it's 8 by 10s. You can get it 11 by 15s, 5 by 7s. You can even get them in larger quantities, so that way you can custom make your own, whatever suits your needs. So here's some more interleaving tissue in 11 by 15 size. This is from Archival Methods. Let's see that there. And again, all of the online sources for housing material will be noted on one of our slides so that you can see. Here is an example of acid-free folder. You can see, kind of see the thickness of that. So again, if you can only afford a folder, you can, and your objects are in good condition, you can just purchase folders and house your collection in these too. That's it for now. Okay. Moving on. So different housing methods. Questions to ask yourself is your collection a large collection? Are there newspapers? Again, so that way you can differentiate what type of housing materials you need, and to separate the newspapers, and also to separate your objects by size. It just makes buying housing material easier. Condition is important, as well as labeling the outside of your enclosures, whether they're folders, envelopes, or boxes. Okay, so let's talk more about issues here. Okay, so let me just repeat. So to save space and money, a larger paper collection that is of legal or letter size and is in good condition can be housed in folders and in boxes. Again, if the paper is in poor condition, additional supports should be used, such as mat boards, polyester envelopes, which is again the safe plastic, folders, and should be, so they can be stored in polyester envelopes and folders, and should be stored flat, not vertically. Determine your housing based on the extent and damage type present that you see on your paper. That's always helpful. So if there are issues with embrittlement, tearing, or loose parts, consider placing them in sheeting and acid-free folders or envelopes. Okay, now some specifics here. So documents and other size letters and ephemera. So that would be like manuscripts or pamphlets. Pamphlets are a little bit smaller, but more letters and manuscripts. They can be placed in acid-free folders and into boxes with file slings too, if you choose to do so. If grouping a certain set of papers is needed, the use of a folder is a perfect solution rather than using staples or paper clips. So you can segregate your particular papers that need to be together into an envelope, and you can use, again, the interleaving tissue if placing more than one paper in a folder. Again, or you can use polyester plastic enclosures to lie flat or upright. So oversized ephemera should be housed flat and in folders. If there are issues with embrittlement, extra support is needed, again, such as blue board or plastic sheeting such as polyester. Polyester is probably best because it is the thickest type of safe plastic. Again, they come in rolls and it depends on the quantity that you need. Okay, so as I demonstrated, as I showed that particular box, pamphlets can be stored in the same method as above, but if easy access is a priority, the open pamphlet file box is a good solution. Okay, now talking about unbound periodicals and newspapers. So they're loose. So loose newspapers and periodicals should be stored in polyester sheets or folders and with each other, and no other type of paper in that particular box. So they need to be on their own newspapers. The box tend to be shallow and large depending on the size of your newspaper, but most boxes for newspapers are standard, but they're fairly large. So also think ahead about where you can store those as well. So let's see here. So again, as a general rule, it's best to store the bulky, more heavier paper separately or on the bottom of a box, and then you layer the lighter, more delicate papers on top of that. Okay, and in case you're wondering, the images you see on our 1920s couch, this is in the living room of La Casa Nueva, 1920s Spanish colonial revival style. Say that 3 times fast. So La Casa Nueva, 1920s house. This is the living room and the couch there. You see a layout of magazines, examples of what we have in our collection. So there's a Standard Oil magazine and a Time magazine. And then you see the pamphlets that all talk about tourism as well as hiking, San Gabriel Mountain and the Hollywood Bowl. So we do have a variety of different paper objects. So, and they're all from the 1920s. Okay, moving on. So here's a slide for online sources for housing materials. So primarily, we utilize Gaylord Archival, University Products, Hollinger Metal Edge, and archival methods. Now, I will say they are not, they provide a wonderful variety of housing materials that conservators, curators, museum professionals would need. They are not, they do sell housing materials that are somewhat expensive, so just keep that in mind. But if the products are too costly on these online sources, you can go on Amazon to look for better deals, provided that you look for, again, the terms that you would want to see, which are acid-free, linen-free, buffered, and not just archival quality. But even if you find something that's a bit more affordable for your resources, and it does say archival quality, remember you can always use the pH pen. So, show you that. Okay. All right. And if need be, we can go back and show this slide if you need more time to write out the website. Okay, now storage locations. So spaces that are common in the home, what we'll be talking about next, areas to avoid, and choosing furniture such as wood and metal furniture. Okay, so choosing the storage location is just as important as choosing the proper housing materials. Storage spaces found within the home can provide acceptable areas for long-term housing if chosen carefully. So general spaces such as a room or area that is centrally located, or closet spaces provide a viable option. Typically, these areas are relatively stable in temperature and humidity, which plays a significant factor in preservation, and is usually always a cool, dark place where sunlight doesn't have access to it constantly. So my suggestion is to place items on shelves to avoid storing on floors. Lowest position from the floor should be about 4 to 6 inches off the ground to avoid damage such as moisture damage from a flood or easy access of pests that are floor crawling pests. So the image you see at the top right is of one of the closets in the 1920s mansion that we actually use, as you can see, for storage. So what goes in there are mostly textiles. But again, closet spaces are a viable option for a variety of different types of objects, including paper. Okay. Now, places to avoid. You would want to avoid areas such as garages, attics, basements, due to their fluctuating and extreme sometimes temperature and humidity fluctuations. So we'll talk more about what that means next. But again, places to avoid are garages, attics, and basements. They're not the best environment to store for long-term your objects of any kind, really. Now, talking about wood and metal furniture, wood is not recommended as a place for long-term storage due to its tendency to off-gas. So wood off-gases naturally, even if it's sealed. In fact, even a sealant will off-gas, but with its additional vapors of that sealant. So it's kind of tricky. But there is a solution. You can line your drawers and shelves with what's called Marvaseal, and it is an aluminized polyethylene. So it has components of aluminum mixed with plastic. Polyethylene, remember, is one of the safe plastics. And it provides a barrier. It's like a barrier film, and it's also, of course, acid-free. And then you can use that to line your drawers or your shelves, along with maybe acid-free blue board. So that's usually the best case scenario. So the picture on the bottom there is in one of the bedrooms, again, in the 1920s house. And it's actually an object stored within an object. So that is a etagere from about the 1920s. And we have some textiles in there as well. Okay. Now, again, choose the best option for you based on your resources and your space. So don't feel bad if you can't do everything that I've been suggesting so far. Okay. Now we're talking about the storage environment. So we'll talk about stable temperature, relative humidity, and what is humidity, recommended levels, as well as how to control and stabilize both temperature and relative humidity. So research has shown that paper can become damaged when placed in a storage environment where there is high fluctuation and low of temperature and humidity. This causes paper to expand and contract. And this is due to its naturally hygroscopic nature, meaning that it just typically, it's like a sponge. It'll soak up any moisture within its environment. And then this can lead to, again, embrittlement, tearing, and weakening of paper fibers and distortion of overall shape. So what is humidity? Generally, it is the amount of moisture in an environment. Okay? Now, how to control and stabilize temperature and relative humidity. There are ways to do so, but first you need to know what are the recommended levels. So for temperature humidity levels, as recommended by the environmental guidelines for the storage of paper records, they state that the temperature should not exceed 70 degrees. So temperature should not be above 70 degrees, and the relative humidity should remain a steady 30 to 50% relative humidity. Again, should be 70 degrees, no higher than 70 degrees, or you can also have the range between 68 to 70 degrees, 68 to 70 degrees, and the humidity should be between the ranges of 30 to 50%. Now, how to measure that is by a temperature humidity little monitor that can be purchased online on any of the online resources that I mentioned, and also Amazon. So the photo in the middle shows such a reader, and that reader at the time showed it was 68 degrees, and which is great. And it was at 55% relative humidity, which was not so great. And this was in Agnes's bedroom, one of the only daughter that survived of the man that owned the 1920s house. So this was her bedroom. So what do? You can control your climate by use of a portable AC to control the temperature. And then the humidity, you can get it down to an acceptable range by using a dehumidifier. Now be careful with the dehumidifier when purchasing one. You have to make sure that you know the square footage approximately, or the size of your room that you need the help with that humidity. So dehumidifiers come in different levels of power, shall we say. So if you have just like a standard bedroom, small bedroom, medium, large, it should always be indicated on the box or on the product info of the dehumidifier. They do come with a water reserve on the bottom of their, usually a water reserve on the bottom of the unit for the dehumidifier. So you have to keep watch of that and empty it out occasionally, or it depends on the amount of humidity you're dealing with, okay? Another way to regulate humidity is the use of damp rids. Now, damp rids are pretty good for smaller spaces like closet spaces. They come with a plastic container, as you can see, but inside they come with little pellets that are absorbent pellets that absorb the moisture in the air. Now, the good thing about the damp rids is that you can reuse the plastic container, but you have to purchase the pellets. So those are not reusable. And in fact, once they do their job, which means they soak up all the moisture in the air, it turns into liquid, which you would have to dump out. Okay.
Michelle, I have a question on clarification. You talked about a drawer liner. Could you repeat the name of that and spell it for us?
Yes, Marva Seal, M-A-R-A. So sorry, hold on 1 second. I have to write this out. Okay, so it's Marva Seal, M as in Mary, A-R-V-A-S-E-A-L, Marva Seal. Okay.
And is that one word or two words?
It's one word. Okay. All right. Now, damage types. So these are the specific damage types that are most commonly found on paper, but I'd like to talk a little bit about the more broad terms, which are called the agents of deterioration. This is more specific. So the agents of deterioration basically describe how objects of a variety, whether they're paper, photo, textiles, woods, how they get damaged. So those agents are fire, water, pests, physical force, mishandling, in other words, neglect also, theft, vandalism, fluctuating or incorrect temperature, humidity levels, and light, specifically natural lighting, UV rays. So those are the more encompassing agents of deterioration. And what we see here are the specifics. So more of what we find on paper, but a little more specific. So please bear with me if you are aware of the damage type definitions that I'm going to go over. Okay, so abrasion. Abrasion is basically surface loss, typically found on edges of papers like postcards and pamphlets and other paper types. Surface loss caused by friction. This is caused by improper handling or housing materials that are not, that do not provide adequate room. Creases and folds can weaken paper fibers over time, causing tearing, which is very common. So we know creases and folds, you can see in that particular document that is one of the oldest ephemera types that we have from about the 1830s. You could see the actual creases from the folds that it was in at one time. So that causes an issue. Acid burn is a result of exposure to something highly acidic, such as paper, that has high wood pulp content that has not been purified. So sometimes we see this when papers are touching each other. Again, there's that acid transfer. Embrittlement is basically the loss of flexibility, causing paper to break down or disintegrate when moved or bent. So it's not flexible when it's embrittled. And this is caused by fluctuations in humidity and temperature, and even overexposure to light. Foxing, and we will see examples of some of these damage types in a little bit. But foxing basically results in reddish or brown spots on your paper that are caused by environmental factors. It has something to do with the iron content, if there's any in your paper, and can signal a mold issue as well. It might not be an active mold issue, but at one time there was probably some mold there. Now, speaking of mold, it's a fungi, not a fun guy. A fungi that grows in areas where it is warm with high levels of humidity. And it causes, of course, musty odors and web-like growths. But by the time the web growths are visible, it's already a severe case. Musty odors, usually if you don't see growth, musty odors signals the beginning of what could potentially be a mold issue. So that way you can do something about it and regulate the temperature. So stains, soiled or discolored spots, tears, of course, as you can see on that document. Linear breaks on paper due to overstretching and twisting. And let's see, losses can occur from any of these damage types. So a loss would be considered a loss. So there's a loss of a portion of that paper, as you can see there on that document, that letter to the far right edge. So that's a loss there. Light. So light, prolonged exposure to UV rays causes irreversible damage. So I'll say that again. Overexposure to natural sunlight causes irreversible damage, meaning we cannot treat it to go back to its original condition, such as yellowing and other discoloration. And sometimes I have even seen a document not in our collection, but I have seen documents that have had so much exposure to light that it completely bleaches out. So you lose the content of that paper, and it's completely faded and it's weakened and embrittled. So it's something to keep in mind. Okay. Now, PES and IPM. So we'll talk about PES, but IPM, just really quickly, is Integrated Pest Management. So going back to pests, so common pests, pests that feed off of organic composition of objects such as paper are typically silverfish and book lice, okay? More commonly silverfish though. They prefer areas where it is damp and dark, and they tend to eat the first layer of paper, resulting in what looks like grazing. Also, rodents feed off of paper, but their telltale signs are much more noticeable. They have literally chew marks on the edges, where silverfish and book lice, you can see the grazing that lies on the top surface of your paper. Now, spiders are not a threat necessarily to a collection, but they do feed on pests that are detrimental to a paper collection. So watch out for the spider population in and around your home, because that's a good indication there's something going on there. Spiders will go where they have access to food. Okay, so integrated pest management is crucial. Again, IPM is integrated pest management, and it's crucial to keeping the pests away from your collection. And what it basically is a systematic approach that uses practices such as good housekeeping, meaning sweeping, vacuuming, dusting areas, dusting off shelves and areas that have visible dust and debris. Dust and debris, if left on their own, can attract pests. And if they're left to accumulate on the surface of a, say, object like a paper, it can embed itself on the layer and cause breakdown of fibers. So it can weaken your overall paper. So also monitoring the temperature, humidity is key. Monitoring for pests, such as the non-sticky traps that you see there at the very top. Use of lures or packs, such as the Deco pack, which is used for silverfish and other crawling pests, typically help to resolve the infestation issue. But when you're dealing with a silverfish pack like Deco, please read the instructions carefully when using that particular pack. Do not place them in areas where pets or children can easily access them. And again, just read the instructions very carefully. So the image, the first one is of a silverfish. And then we have the book lice. Then we have at the top the non-sticky trap with a spider, unfortunately, caught in its trap. And then at the bottom is the blue Deco silverfish packs. So by using the systematic approach of IPM, good housekeeping, monitoring of pests, lowering temperature, humidity to stable levels, and also sealing any entry points, sealing cracks, crevices near entry points such as doors and windows will usually help to lower the risks of a major infestation. Okay? Now, treatment, sometimes you will have to treat an object. That can involve freezing, but that is something left to a professionally trained museum curator or conservator to do. So if you have issues with that, please feel free to email me and I can guide you through that or have you look for someone who can help you too. Okay, so an example of silverfish damage, take a look at the left image. Now that is a 1920s Southern California tourist pamphlet. Now it should be kind of clear, though you see the uneven edges of the grazing there. And along the edges, it could kind of resemble rodent issues, but you don't see the distinct chew marks. So you see instead the surface, superficial surface grazing. That's how you know silverfish was feasting on your particular paper object. And the next image you see is the 52 Sunday Dinners, another 1920s pamphlet. And we see things like creasing, a little bit of fading, as well as some signs of silverfish damage along the edge on the left of the spine. Next, we're going to look at what acid burn looks like. Okay, so the image you see on the left is of Raymond Hotel postcard, hotel that was up and running during the 1910s. But if you look up, first of all, if you look at the general image of the postcard there, it's discolored. There's some fading issues. At the very top left, it's almost like a vertical slant. You see kind of a discoloration, a browning effect there. So that tells me that this particular postcard was housed in a scrapbook that had those black tabs to hold a photo or postcard in place. And over time, that's an example of the transfer of acid. So acid burn from the scrapbook holder to the postcard. So that is, I would consider that maybe minor, light version of acid burn versus the more larger issue of the acid burn on the right of a campaign paper of a particular man campaigning for a nonpartisan political office by the name of Samuel Kearns. So you can see clearly that although this is one particular campaign paper, it is highly discolored from more than half the top there. And then on the bottom is what it probably, its original color was like. So this again tells me that something was laying on it, on top of it directly, maybe even another pamphlet. If you look at how straight that edge is of that brown acid burn to the normal color of it, that tells me that something was lying on top of it for a long time and causing that direct acid transfer to that particular paper. Okay. Now we'll look at foxing. So foxing, you can just see the beginning signs of it. It's kind of hard to tell. We can obviously see there's creasing, and that's from the tension of the staples on the particular pamphlet and the binding. By the way, this is a catalog for men's shoes from the 1920s. So you can see the little brown dots just at the bottom there and at the top. So that's again the sign of foxing issue. And next is a broader visual of issues from abrasion damage and again to acid burn or matte burn, silverfish, tearing, foxing, yellowing, rodent with their distinct chew marks on the corner there, and then embrittlement. So you know your paper has issues when it's starting to flake, and it could even, if you mishandle it and something is highly embrittled, it can turn literally into dust. I haven't had that happen to me yet, knock on wood, but I know it has occurred to others. So it's an issue. Okay. So steps that you can take. So there are certain other steps you can take further than just proper housing to really help your paper. And you don't need to be a paper conservator or a museum professional to do these particular procedures. So cleaning. So what you will need is a soft bristle brush known as haki, which is a bamboo handled brush. And there's an example of that in the photo there on the right, but then I have one here. And it's really great to use because if you get, say, this size, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 handled bamboo handles, you can take this apart and custom size it yourself. So these are usually found in university products online or Gaylord Archival. And so what you would do is you would start at the center and gently sweep toward the edge and outward of your paper. And you would want to do this from top to bottom, front and back. Okay. Now, something to remember is that this is soft bristle, so that's what you would want. It's preferable to have soft bristle brushes. And this is made out of sheep hair, so it's very soft. You can, and I do encourage you, after using it, you should technically clean it. And so how you would do that is you can use distilled water, which is available in most stores, the grocery stores or Targets or Walmarts. You can buy distilled water by the gallon, and you can use something called Orvis. So Orvis is a detergent that has non-sulfates in it, and it is typically used to shampoo horsehair, but we use it also in textile conservation to lower the pH, the acidity levels of textiles. Yes, clothes also have acid levels in them too, depending on their makeup. So you can use Orvis, and Orvis is found online as well. You can find it in Gaylord Archival or university products. And you just mix a little bit of that with some distilled water, and you can clean this right up. Okay. So document cleaning powder. So I would say if you have dirt and grime that cannot be removed with a simple act of using the brush, then you can go ahead and use document powder. The only thing I would stress to you is before you even attempt to use this powder is to make sure that there you have a digitized copy, so you photograph your paper to have a digital copy of the content, and make sure that you are aware that if you use document powder, it can remove pencil markings. So unless they're important to you for the history of the object, the history of why you have that collection, just use extreme caution and your own discernment. So document powder is also available online. And it looks like this. Okay. So it removes dirt and dust, cleans moldy papers, and it's non-smearing, non-abrasive, and grit-free. This is not, it's kind of expensive, but there's an alternative that you can do with the use of Magic Rub erasers and a cheese grater. So you can make your own document powder, again, saving yourself some money. So what you would do is get a cheese grater, but make sure it's thoroughly cleaned. Preferably get one that is only going to be used for this procedure. And you would gently grade these Magic Rub erasers against the grater until you have your own document powder. And then what you would do is you would gently sprinkle the areas that you need to clean on your paper, and in a circular motion with your index finger and your middle finger in circular motions, go around and begin to have that contact with the granules and your paper. So that's one tip. And then, so for curled paper, again, I can't stress this enough. I wouldn't attempt flattening a paper such as a map or poster or any type of ephemera unless it's in good condition. If there is embrittlement, if it's brittle, if it's flaking, if there's significant tears, I would not touch that. That's when you know you would need the help of a conservator. So someone who's specially trained to do repair work on objects, okay, like paper, a paper conservator. But if it's in good condition, like the map you see there, that's a survey map from the San Gabriel Mission. And you can flatten it yourself or attempt to. If that doesn't work with the use of those weights, you would have to call a conservator, and a humidification process occurs. So it's a special process which relaxes the fibers of the paper so that way you can begin the flattening process. But again, that's only something that a specially trained conservator can do for you. But if it's in good condition, again, you can try it yourself. So you would gently need to unroll it. It's a two-person job. So one person to hold down the unrolled edge and the other person to hold down the other edge, and then to slowly start putting weights. Now these weights, they look like snakes, and they are made out of cotton stockinette material and filled with sand. You can make your own. I would advise using muslin, M as in Mary, U-S-L-I-N, and sewing at the edges, and then filling it with sand that you can find available, usually in craft stores like Michael's, or I'm not sure if Hobby Lobby has it, but usually online you can find sand. So if you don't want to purchase them already made, you can do it yourself too. So again, this is a weight, and the material is cotton stockinette, and it's filled with sand. So all of this here is suitable for exposure to the surface of paper. Okay? And you would of course need to buy more than one, so maybe it is a better option to make it yourself, but just know that those particular weights are available for purchase.
Michelle, Alfonso wants to know, what if the paper is only slightly wrinkled?
If wrinkled or curled?
I have wrinkled in quotation marks down in my question.
Okay, I would say in that case, if it's not an issue, if it's slightly wrinkled and you could still see the content, you could still place it in an enclosure without it curling on itself, it shouldn't be an issue. I wouldn't, if it has creases, if that's the issue, I would try to flatten it, but I don't think that would be an issue. I think the issue would be if the paper is curled to the point where it won't flatten on its own. But if there's visible creases, I wouldn't use weights on that if there is just creases that are visible. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, Alfonso, if that does not answer your question, please ask it again and how we can clarify, and I'll be happy to ask.
Okay, so the next slide, we're talking about digitizing and display. So what the importance of digitizing is what we're talking about, as well as what is digitizing. Cameras and scanners, a simple approach to this, and apps that may help you do all of this and displaying your paper objects. Okay, so let's start with what exactly is digitizing. So it simply means to copy or convert something into a digital form. It is important preservation-wise, a very important step to take in case your original somehow deteriorates beyond repair, beyond help. So it's always good to have a digital copy of your paper objects or your photos or textiles, just so that you have some kind of copy to see what you have in your collection. And also keep in mind that it can be used for displays. So instead of using the original, and you don't have to worry about all kinds of different types of housing materials to house your original, you can use the copy to put in a frame and hang up and leave your copy in a nicely dark place, stable temperature, and nice comfy enclosures. And it also helps to have an image of your objects, each one, to later go back and compare and contrast to see if there are issues now present in terms of damage that were not when you took that photo. So it'll tell you and sometimes show a progression of a breakdown. So that's also something to keep in mind, and why it's important to digitize your whole collection. Now, though most cell phones are equipped with high-powered cameras, I know most folks were not purchasing digital cameras anymore. I'm aging myself, but digital cameras can still be used. And so cameras like Canon are pretty good, and scanners. So scanners also capture an image, but it depends on the scanner in terms of the state of your object. So in other words, there's flatbed scanners that you can put 2D dimensional objects like paper and photo, and you can capture the image that way if you don't want to use your cell phone camera or a digital camera. Though keep in mind that the flatbed does have a lid that goes down. It's okay for one-time use, but that is something that is based on case by case, and it's determined by the condition of your object. So flatbed scanners and handheld scanners are also available. Handheld scanners, I think, are probably one of the best, especially if you have content that you want to save that's bound, so it's in a book form or pamphlet. You can easily just have that scanner handheld and scan the areas that you need copies digitized. Okay, so some of the brands that I'm aware of are Canon. We use Canon for scanners at the museum, and for our digital camera that we have at our photo section, where we capture every photo of every object in our collection. But I also know that Epson is pretty good with scanners as well. Now, apps that may help, I have to have a disclaimer here. I haven't used an app, but another a colleague of mine who's within the field and works in historical society and takes care of a collection that's mixed, has told me that there is an app that is free to download, but there's a monthly subscription that you would need to purchase if you want to get the full benefit of it. It's called PhotoMine. It's PhotoMyne, PhotoMine, and it stores apparently all your images on a cloud, and I believe it has some capacity to help with restoring on the digital copy, restoring color and other features such as that. So check that out if that's something that appeals to you, and let me know too. I might get into that myself, but we'll see. Now, displays. Okay, so if you choose to display your original paper, there are some things that you should consider, and that is framing of that particular paper if you want to display it in a frame on your wall. Okay, so first off, make sure that if you're going to do this yourself, that you have a backing of acid-free blue board, so that way you know that it's acceptable for exposure to your particular paper in the long term. So acid-free blue board, and you can use spacers. They come in different widths and size to space out the glass and the content of inside the frame. So you don't want any glass frame to have direct contact on your paper. That's usually not the best case scenario because you can run into other issues with damage. But if not, you can invest in what's called museum glass, which is 99% UV coated. So it's already coated to prevent the UV rays from the sun attacking your displayed paper. And I know that it's anti-reflective, and I believe you can purchase this through a website called TruVue, T-R-U and space Vue, V-U-E. I believe there are some museums that utilize this particular product. Also, when displaying, just remember, regardless if you have a coated museum glass frame, that you would want to choose an area where direct sunlight is not hitting it all the time. So try to place it in an area where you could still show it off, but away from a window area. So that's all something to keep in mind. Now, conservators. So let's talk about when it's time to consider hiring a conservator, how to look for a professional conservator, what to expect, and how to prepare, okay? First of all, I would like to share a quote by one of my mentors and a man who's been in the conservation field for longer than I've been alive. He is a textile conservator, and I had the pleasure of being in his class for an extensive, intense amount of time to learn about textile conservation and preservation. He said, and I quote, "If in doubt, it is best to do nothing and consult a professional conservator." Harold Mayland is his name. He has an excellent book on textile conservation that if you're interested, you can look him up, and there's some information about that. But I couldn't agree more with that particular quote. If in doubt, it's best to know your capabilities and what is outside of your capabilities and ask for help. There is nothing wrong with admitting that something is beyond your scope of expertise. In fact, that's a good sign that you are aware of that. So that way the integrity of your paper object is always intact and you're always making the right decisions for your particular collection. Okay, so let's talk about when it's time to consider finding a conservator. So if the paper is faded, it's in pieces and you would like it to become intact again, you want it repaired. If it's embrittled or torn, if there's burn issues, if it's charred, some pieces are charred, if there's mold growth, it may be time to consult a conservator. Now, please be prepared that although as museum professionals and curators and conservators, we are all in the business of preventative practice. So by choosing proper housing materials, as well as watching the climate of your storage areas, that's all inclusive in preventative preservation. And then conservators can go ahead and do those repairs if needed, but sometimes even conservators, so be prepared, may tell you that it is beyond repair. So this is why it's so important to digitize before your paper gets to the point where it's not repairable. So at least you save digitally the content of your paper, okay? Now conservators, how to look for one? They seem to be very mysterious. So conservators can be found online via the website that I have up on the slide, American Institute for Conservation, or AIC. which is www.culturalheritage.org. And in there, there's tabs where you can actually narrow down the area that you were willing to travel to find a conservator. So you can even put your zip code, and you can find a listing of conservators who are professionally trained. And there also is a tab where it tells you what type of conservator you would need. So there's paper conservators, textiles, photo conservators, wood conservators, metal, and on, okay? So another way is to contact me. So contact me via email or contact another museum in your area and ask to speak to the curator of that particular museum, and or ask for a conservator if there is one. Now, conservators typically are freelance, so they typically have their own business, but there are still some conservators that work in a museum alongside curators. So it's always best to reach out for your curator, and then the curator can direct you where you need to go if they have a conservator on hand. Now, what to expect and how to prepare. Please know that the consultation, just to assess your objects, there might be a fee involved, or they could just, it's a free consultation. So either they'll charge you a nominal fee or it's a free consultation. And then what you should expect is the conservator will write up a condition report based on their assessment of what they see, what's going on. And they will propose a treatment on paper. They'll write everything out. They'll create a condition report and then give you a proposed treatment. And also really it's to let you know why. They have to defend their treatment techniques. So say, for example, if there's a tear, they would probably use special adhesive and fillers. And so all of that will be detailed in their proposed treatment before they even touch your treatment. So then you would look through that carefully and determine if that's something that you feel is best for your collection. And then of course, they will provide you the estimated cost and how long it will take for the completion of the treatment. Finally, they should provide you a final report of what occurred during the process. So sometimes the conservators have best intentions, they always do, but sometimes they'll encounter an issue along the way that will require them to use a different technique or to use a more in-depth technique, in which case they should call you and let you know or contact you ahead of time anyway, but that all should be stipulated in their final report. Okay, so again, they will give you either a free consultation or there'll be a charge for it. They will provide a condition report and proposed treatment as to why their repair work is suitable for the needs of your paper. They'll provide you an estimated cost and time. So that should all be within the proposed treatment report. And then finally, a separate report that details exactly what they did. And usually you can request them, or it's best for you to take photos, even if you have another digital photo copy. Take a photo of every detail of your paper, front and back, so that way you know before it left your hands what condition it was in. So you can also compare the work when it comes back to you, compare the conservator's work. Okay. All right, so now for more on preservation, you can go to the Library of Congress, conservagrams. I will tell you, conservagrams are my favorite. They are a wonderful service online that is provided through the National Park Service. And what's so great about conservagrams is that it is divided between handling or housing, and even divided even more into specifics like paper objects, photo objects, textiles, woods. It even talks about digitizing and other factors that are important for preservation of every type of object you can think of. So conservograms are great. As well as Northeast Document Conservation Center, NEDCC.org is a wonderful place also to show you how to label your paper objects. So they even talk about use of a number 1 pencil. Now, if you have to label your paper directly, use of number one pencil is always recommended because it's a softer lead. To label things like your envelopes or your folders or your boxes, you can always just use a number 2 pencil or any other standard pencil. But remember, if anything you do to your object, it should be reversible. That is the number 1 rule of thumb for curators, preservation specialists, and conservators even. Anything you do to your object should be reversible. If it isn't, it's not good for your object. Okay. Now, thank you so much for your participation today. I really enjoy leading these workshops. And another thing before we go to our questions and answers is I want to make sure that I reassure you. Know that you are doing the best you can based on the knowledge you have and the resources at your disposal. So if you go through this whole workshop with me and you feel bad because you feel you're not doing something right, don't. Just know that by participating in workshops like this and informing yourself, you're doing a world of good. Even if you can only afford to buy folders that are acid-free to house your objects, you're doing really well for your objects. So please know that also I'm here. If you need me for further questions, if I can help you, I am honored to do so. You can email me at mmuro@homesteadmuseum.org. And please follow us at the Homestead. We are on social media platforms. You can keep up with us. And we are having upcoming programs. So we have a fiction book club, and we have other talks and lectures and other experiences to be had virtually. So don't forget about us, okay? All right. Questions?
All right, Michelle. Oh, I have questions for you. And if you haven't asked your question yet, feel free to ask them now. The chat or the Q&A box will be fine. And if you're on Facebook, you can put them in the comments. The first question I have queued up is from Janet. She wants to know if you can just roll the map up and stick it in the tube if you use interleaving material and the item's in good condition.
I would say I can understand the thinking behind it, but I would say that it would be preferable to roll the map on the tube simply because it is providing support for that map. And then you can put it inside of a box if you can afford a tube. So I would, to answer your question, I would still use a tube, acid-free tube, to roll your paper. And then you put it in a box if you have it.
All right, and she wants to know the best way to store documents such as birth certificates. She leaves them folded in or out of the envelope, or if she does that, the ink sticks to the paper, in which case she's ordering a new certificate about every 4 to 5 years. If she puts it in a plastic sheet, the ink adheres to that sheet.
So I would look at what's going on with the environment and where it's stored in. That sounds to me like there's something going on with temperature, humidity. It could even be, it might not even be that. It might be what's called inherent vice, so which means it's something to do with the chemical compounds in that particular birth certificate and the ink. So I would digitize that, and I would, if it's an issue with plastic, it depends on the type of plastic that you're using. But it seems like any form of plastic is a no-go for that particular document. So I would go with a folder, acid-free folder, or I would go with an envelope and then go from there.
All right. Dee says, thank you for the sources. They used one after your last workshop and have now protected over 100, or sorry, now protected their 100 to 150-year-old photos with buffered archival tissue.
Yes, that warms my heart. I am so glad. I'm so glad. That sounds great. Keep up the good work. That is awesome.
All right. Janet asks, what about concert tickets? They're a collector since the early 70s, and they're noticing that on some of them the ink is fading. They bought concert ticket books, but they don't think they're good for preservations. Do you have any recommendations for these tickets?
So if they're in books, and I'm assuming they have perforated edges that you can detach to kind of keep the integrity of the whole ephemera, I would use interleaving tissue. I would, again, digitize, take a photo of every ticket, and then I would wait about a month and go back and check once a month. If you see more deterioration, then that is something where you should consider a paper conservator. That would be a perfect example of needed help. But definitely photograph each ticket, keep monitoring it and interleave it, and keep it stored in a cool and relatively stable environment in terms of temperature, humidity.
And actually, because we have a concert ticket person next to me who's very passionate about them, there's a thread on Reddit that says that it's actually thermal paper is part of the problem with concert tickets. So they're kind of designed to fade in sunlight and heat to avoid certain copying and stuff of them. So you'll have to maybe look up thermal paper in particular for concert tickets.
That's where digitizing is so important. Paper in itself is not made to have a long life. It's only practices such as proper housing that really elongate the life of that particular object. So I really would consider even just snapping a picture with your cell phone if you can, and keeping that somewhere stored for sure.
And Di says, thank you for this workshop, and I apologize for mispronouncing your name the first time.
Oh, that's okay, no problem. Thank you for participating.
We have a question from Karen. If I pronounced that wrong, let me know. You mentioned using Marvaseal for wood containers, but you didn't hear anything, or you didn't say anything about metal containers. Are filing cabinets okay if they are in cool, dry rooms?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, metal containers should be should be lined with at least the very least blue board or ethafoam. Ethafoam is a kind of spongy material that you can find online on the resources, and you can line it, and then it should be okay for use.
All right, Alfonso asks that he would like to create a scrapbook of his daughter's drawings. Would acid-free glue stick be safe enough to paste the drawings into a scrapbook, or should he choose a different method?
I would stay away from any adhesives. I would, in this case, use an album that has inserts that are a 3-ring binder, and have inserts of one of the safe plastics, again, either polyester, propylene, or polyethylene, and stay clear from adhering the actual art.
Janet, I am thinking the material is written on it. She'll get the envelopes that you recommend. She thanks you.
You're welcome.
They're her own tickets, so she will digitalize them. All right, guys, I'm going to give you about 5 more seconds in case any last questions come in. But we wanted to thank you all for joining us for this workshop. There will be a survey sent out through email later, and we would greatly appreciate it if you filled that out because it helps us continue to improve our programs in the future. And Alfonso, thanks you very much, Michelle.
Thank you so much, guys. And please enjoy your weekend and email me if you have any questions. Thank you, everybody.
Oh, we have one last question actually coming in a second.
Sure.
We got one in.
Sure.
Karen would like to know how you learned all this. She's starting an MLIS program and considering archival studies. So this is the very first thing she learned, and she thanks you as well.
Thank you for your question. Aside from the years of experience, hands-on experience I have on site, really, to be quite honest, my degrees in liberal arts and history did not prepare me for the preservation world. What prepared me was my mentors here at the museum, the years of experience working with the mixed collection, my own research, and then most importantly, my certification that I acquired through the Campbell Center as well. So the Campbell Center was, or it used to be known as the Campbell Center. I think it's now International Preservation Institute, but it is known worldwide in the field that a place that provides schooling for a plethora of different types of preservation issues and curatorial field as well. So the personal enrichment really helped. So it was a mixture of on-site training at the Homestead Museum, as well as workshops and professional enrichment through certification from the Campbell Center.
All right, we have a thank you from Janet and Dolores as well, and I believe we are now done with all questions. If you're joining us on Facebook, I'm about to drop the Facebook survey link there, so please stay tuned for that. Otherwise, thank you all so much for joining us today, and thank you, Michelle, and we hope that you all have a lovely week.